Hi everyone, I'm Lauren from AVIXA and welcome to the March Design Power Hour series. Today's webinar topic is content management with multiple users. This webinar is being brought to you by our webinar sponsor, Samsung. Joining us from Samsung today is going to be Parrish Chapman, Director of Enterprise Sales within Samsung's B2B display division. Our roundtable discussion will be led by Kelly Smith, who's a Senior Manager of Digital Network at Cadillac Fairview and member of the DSF board. Before I hand the presentation over to Kelly, there are a few housekeeping items. For those viewing live, today's webinar qualifies for one CTS, CTSD, and CTSI RU credit. Please allow 5 to 7 business days to view on your transcripts. For any issues, please email webinars@avixa.org. The webinar will be approximately 45 to 60 minutes long, and all attendees will be placed on mute. The event chat is available on the right-hand side bar, and that's where you can communicate with all of the attendees. Please introduce yourself in the event chat and let us know where you're from. If you have any questions for the speakers today, please enter those into the Q&A window where your fellow attendees can upvote their favorite questions. To access the Q&A window, simply move your cursor to the bottom of your live stream video box to locate the Q&A icon and click open. We'll take audience questions throughout the webinar. You have access to this webinar as it is recorded at avixa.org/webinars and that'll be available about 5 business days. Before we get started, I'd like to invite everyone to participate in a poll. To start this presentation, click on the poll button to submit your response. And now I will hand things over to Kelly.
Thank you, Lauren. As Lauren said, my name is Kelly Smith. I'm the Senior Manager, Digital Network for Cadillac Fairview. I am the business lead who advances the scope and scale of our digital signage network across our retail properties. I'm also a part of the Board of Directors of the Digital Signage Federation. I am joined today by Ryan Cahoy, who's been around the digital signage space for the last 20 plus years. He serves on the Digital Signage Federation Board of Directors and is the owner of Rise Display, which is an LED ticker provider, and the Chief Revenue Officer for InReality, a venue analytics provider. As Lauren mentioned, we are also joined by Parrish Chapman, who's the Director of B2B Retail Sales Display Division, U.S. Market. The team he leads is focused within the retail enterprise office vertical. He's passionate about improving people, process, and technology. And we're also joined by Dominic Desieno. Dominic has been the digital signage technical lead at Wells Fargo for more than 10 years and is a member of the DSF board as well for just over 1 year. He's responsible for the R&D on any new technology for the nationwide digital signage platform with more than 3,500 endpoints. So today we're going to be talking about content management with multiple users. This is a really important thing to consider, particularly as your network starts to scale and it becomes more established, more mature, more people want to participate in it. All too often, the topic of content management strategies is not given enough thought during the launch phase of your project and is often thought about as, oh, it can just be done by so-and-so in whatever department. And it's a dangerous thought to consider because it either means that you don't believe that the content management is important, or you believe that the people you're thinking of passing it off on are not busy enough. And we all know that we're very busy in our roles, all of us. So we'll talk about the importance of having a plan for managing content with regards to scheduling, approval, the strategy, considering how we can make light work of many hands. Talk about display management versus content management, and how do different teams maybe need to participate? Who's going to feed this beast? What is their purpose? And by doing that, we can hopefully help you give a little bit more autonomy and control to the different stakeholders of your digital signage network, and also create less dependence on IT for support. So we have a number of questions for our panel, and how we'll approach this is I'll ask one of the questions, and the panelists can take turns kind of being the lead on that question, and the others can offer some support. So the first question, are there types of organizations or projects where this idea and requirement of having more users participate just makes a bit more sense?
Any project when it comes to digital signage is important to have these steps and these processes. And I think large organizations, it makes sense. but also from a small organization too, to make sure you have redundancies and the fail-safes from day one to understand who has that content ownership and who's going to be supporting changing out the content. So I think, no matter what size organization you have, these strategies can play in a role to protecting your content and brand strategy, and really understand who supports when something goes wrong with the content, or if you want to change out the content. So any size organization and just about any project, especially when the public's viewing it, to protect your brand.
Ryan, do you have anything to add? You want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. Like it does fit everywhere in pretty much all the niches that are out there. It's great for schools when they're looking at the district level, trying to share messages school wide, as well as, putting in initiatives that are coming in from like the local administrators for teacher profiles, honor rolls, that type of thing. Same holds true for corporations that have multiple branches and offices spread, across the country, around the world. It's great where leadership can put out how we're doing against goals and KPIs, while local managers can put more local content, employees, that kind of thing. So, it may be cumbersome to try to centralize, especially when you've got a large network, versus empowering everybody locally to contribute content.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, obviously in Wells, we're a large company, so things are different. And just as a background too, so we have the digital signage team, which is basically the content creators and content distributors. And then we have the technology team, which is what I'm on. We support the digital signage team and make sure, they have everything they need. But then it breaks down even further, because that digital signage team has customers of their own, and they break it down to 3 different ones. So we have retail, which is our branches, obviously the public sees all that stuff. And then we have internal line of businesses, which is like the mortgage department or consumer lending, any of those, just internal departments. And then we have obviously the corporate messaging. So it's so different in how we handle the content for each of those 3 segments. You have to come up with the systems and make sure that you have everything in place, because otherwise then it's willy-nilly and somebody's going to throw up a cat video or something. So you just need to make sure, you have people. And it's always a question we have in our meeting. We come up with these new places, they're called test and learns. And it's always, okay, question 1 is who's going to be responsible to maintain the sign and keep it fresh and up to date? Because we always say, content is king. And if it's stale, then no one's going to look at it. So you absolutely have to have a process in place.
That's actually a really good segue, Dominic, into our second question, which was going to be for you, is how do you decide who gets access and who doesn't?
So we have the three different verticals. So each one is completely different, and each one handles their content differently. So with corporate messaging, they have their own people who create the messages and then approve them and everything, because those are that's a different type of communication than, say, the retail side, which is going public. They have their whole nother group of content creators, approvers. They do storyboards. They do this whole thing. It's very much like an advertising agency, if you will, if you're familiar with that. And then the line of business is completely different from the other two, because a lot of the line of business content is data integration. So what you need to do is figure out who's going to be responsible. Will they need an approval process? Who's doing the content creation, and how many people are you going to do that? It really depends. I don't think there's one answer that will solve for everybody, because every organization is going to be different. But as long as there's accountability, it doesn't matter, I think, what system you come up with, as long as you know who's going to be accountable and ultimately be able to handle that. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I'll throw my 2 cents in. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it depends on the type of the data and the frequency of the updates that are there. it's pretty easy when you've got a small network and, just simple content that maybe changes weekly. That's easy to have one central person that updates it. When you've got a large, diverse network, multiple departments, multiple locations, content that's changing frequently, that's where you got to really figure out what owner is most efficient to update that content on the screen so that it doesn't take a long time to make a quick update. And we've all seen, lots of networks fail because the content gets stale. And that's when people start to ignore the digital displays. So when you've got more contributors and you're empowering them, typically you're going to have more buy-in, and there's a much better chance for the network to succeed.
Parrish, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I think quite simply, it's content ownership, content purpose, and then are there things that will impact the content if it's forward-facing versus internal, and then the legality of that content. I think those are the main boxes that Ryan and Dominic have really summarized from a very detailed process. Those are the questions we ask and how we give access and assign. Great,
thanks. The third question, I'm gonna direct this one to Ryan to start. And this question may sound a little vague, but I think that it's in the spirit of starting small with good intentions and supporting your network as it grows and as people get excited about it. But how do you scale this idea as more and more people want to participate? I guess both logistically, how do you scale it, but also how do you keep some sort of reins on it?
Yeah, I think we've already kind of touched on it, both, Parrish and Dominic. Yeah. It's all about ownership. Like, you've got to define that clear owner that's accountable for the success of the network. And ideally, it's tied to some kind of KPI that's measurable. It's not a wishy-washy thing. Because if you've got a clear owner and they're vested in the success of this thing, they're going to define the processes, they're going to provide training, they're going to guide the new users that are coming in. And when you bring in those new users, that's what you really want. You want, clear, how do they contribute? What are the guidelines? And then giving them regular training so they know how to publish content, is really important. Mm-hmm. A big mistake that a lot of organizations make is they get so wrapped up in specifying the right hardware and what software am I going to use and how do I figure out how to roll this out and install it. And then it goes on the wall and everybody looks at each other and goes, who's going to update this thing? And it rarely works if there's not a champion to get everybody on board and kind of drive it through.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think, Ryan's it's already kind of pinpointed this, the stakeholders, really who has original ownership of that content. And then how does that spider out from the content who's impacted is how you really scale and design that content strategy, if you will. I think if more businesses looked at their content as like a social media, but really a content strategy and design it out that way, with the first owner of that responsibility and then spider into those different organizations, it becomes simpler to do that.
That's a great point. Thinking about the software and the tools that we enable to allow this to happen. I know that many, if not all, of the enterprise level CMS solutions that are available on the market are going to have some form of user roles, permissions, and approval workflows built in that you can use to support that. What are your thoughts on the values of implementing these tools right from the start, even before your network gets to the scale of having a ton of different users? What are your thoughts on using these? Dominic, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, again, every CMS is going to be different. So if we're talking about you want to know the features of the CMS and whether or not you want to incorporate all of those right from the get-go. I think it depends on the solution you're trying to solve for. Every organization is going to be different, from are you just doing a couple of screens? Or are you doing 100 screens? So the CMS that you choose is going to have functionality from A to Z, and you might not need all of that functionality right out of the gate. Some CMSs allow for control of the screens. You might not need that. Some you can set up, date parting where you run certain things at certain days and certain times of the day based on, clientele. Some even will do that. Some will change the messaging automatic based on, a camera and the demographic of the people in front. So the question I think you need to start with is what problem or solution are we trying to solve for? And then from there, figure out what functionality you need going forward. Everything's going to change, right? There's always a phase 2, a phase 3 in any project. So I think as long as you keep it simple in the beginning, especially when you're first starting out, from there, you can always add on to it. So I feel like it's a very non-answer, but I think you need to figure out what you're trying to solve for, and then figure out the at least the minimum amount of requirements that you need to achieve that goal.
That's a great point. Parrish, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think number one, I look at things a little differently because of risk mitigation and protecting brands' images. And I think this is the number one thing we're talking about in today's world is we do not want an image to appear on a screen that is unapproved, no matter what that image is. So number one, I say we start with security and control levels. How are we going to make sure we have the proper security protocols and the control protocols with the CMS? That's the base level we're talking about. And then as Dominic mentioned, you can layer there the day parting, the time, changing the content. But at the grassroots of the CMS, you really need to understand the security level, who has access and who can change that content. And then from there, you can build off that foundation. Because most of the time, the calls or negative impressions happen when that goes awry, right? And so I think that's the building blocks of the CMS, number one.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I may have a slightly different opinion than that. I mean, it all depends the context of what you're doing, but I'm a big fan of crawl, then walk, then run. And sometimes when you're deploying a network, it can be overwhelming to try to implement, I got to do content, I got to do scheduling, I got to bring on all these new users. So, I would probably more advocate when you're first starting out, prioritize what's most important. And maybe security is the most important thing, but if you want to start getting a network so you can learn as you're deploying it, you can keep a very controlled group. You could just have 1 or 2 users deploying the content. So it's very controlled. Let them be, the proverbial guinea pigs that understand the quirks in the system. They can document things and they can put together those best practices that when you start layering more people in, you're not all learning together. You've got a few seasoned veterans that have been there in the trenches at the beginning.
That's a really great point. Having people with some learned experiences that they can distribute around the organization. Actually, Ryan, the next question is actually starts with you. And again, this kind of is a good segue. What would you say are some risks of not allowing multiple people to participate in the content management?
I mean, I think the biggest risk is if you've got one person updating everything. What happens when they go on vacation, or what happens if they up and quit? Multiple users is going to ensure continuity of a network, into the future. We all talk about content's king and the importance of keeping content fresh. I mean, that's where multiple users really ensures that that's going to happen, because if you got the frequent updates, then people are going to pay attention, and the adoption and the usefulness of the signage is really going to come out. So, to me, I think the biggest risk is, if you don't do this, your content will probably go stale.
Parrish, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think Ryan's right. I mean, redundancy is very important from day one, but I think also a vested interest from different, even a small company, maybe you need to allow your ad agency to help you design some better content or look at it, or you have a backup plan if you do go on vacation. The large organization, content, everybody wants to have ownership in content and that branding message. So you have online marketing departments, or you have internal corporate branding, HR. And I think you really need to allow that talent to flow. So there's ownership and pride in the branding, to get people really behind this strategy. As Ryan mentioned, and Dominic knows too, that if you don't have this combined synergies, long term, you will really struggle with keeping that content performing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will add though, I think you can have too many. As
Okay.
you know, I think we all agree it shouldn't just be one, but I think there's definitely a limit on the other end where you can have too many. I mean, we've run into, when we first started, we gave our customers, like the line of business, like I was saying before, access to the CMS, and that just turned out to be a nightmare. I mean, without getting too far into it, it was just, we were in charge
No,
of.
please give us the juicy details.
Now there's enough juicy details in the news about Wells Fargo. You don't need me to add to that. So
Okay.
I told myself I wasn't going to say that. No. Okay. Great, Presh. Now I'm totally off track.
So you gave the retail
Too many
the
users.
access. Yeah, sorry.
Right, to the CMS, and it was just a mess. I mean, we were responsible for security as far as the users and who had access to it and whatnot. And it just turned out we just became like a help center, if you will, where the line of business just kept calling. Why can't I do this? You know, how do I do this? So-and-so needs access. So-and-so needs training now in the CMS, and it just became a mess. So, you know, over the years, we found out limiting, well, first of all, restricting their access to the CMS. But then limiting the number of people they could have in each department has worked great. Like we have our credit collections department based out of Arizona. They have 2 people now that handle their 7 contact centers, and they handle all the messaging for those 7 contact centers. And they've opened it up to people in their department where they can send requests in through their normal like ticketing system. And then they process everything through that. And so it's worked out great for them where they have each other. Obviously, one's a backup for the other. You can go on vacation, or the God forbid hit by bus rule. But yeah, so I would say I agree where it shouldn't just be one, but there's definitely a limit on the other end because it gets way out of hand, at
Donna,
least in a
thank you
large
for sharing your
corporation.
pain for us. Thank you.
Yeah.
What about tasks beyond just content management where users may need to access the system? How do we incorporate non-content contributing users into the system to support their workflows, such as monitoring or support? Parrish, I'd like to start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think that no matter what size your business, you need to ask yourself on day 2, when the system goes down, what is my plan or what are my support protocols? Obviously, Dominic mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different CMSs, and Ryan mentioned it too, that allows for remote monitoring of the hardware and the software, proof of play, and I think you need to ask yourself before it goes down, what is my plan and what are those support mechanisms? Or we're going to be using a knock that a lot of, CMSs can provide. And really, I think the goal is at Samsung is we want to be making sure that we can solve 80% of the problems before they occur, right? And I think that's really the big response is, let's look at the problem before they occur, because trying to address those after they happen is very expensive. And again, it doesn't matter the size of your business, because these problems are going to occur. A power outage, the content won't reset. And also what we're finding is beauty advisors, car salesmen, they're not technicians, right? And they get in there and they do the wrong thing. So I think that plan of having the fail safe and asking yourself when it goes down, what is our protocol?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the whole definition of success of this thing is everybody doing their part. We're talking about multi-users, and, a lot of our conversation's been in the spirit of content because that's what everybody thinks about. But when the screen fails, people notice. And again, nobody wants that call. So it's a key role that needs to be accounted for when people are planning who gets notified, not if, when something fails. It is technology. There's going to be an issue, and it's just about resolving it as quick as possible.
Yeah, I think, again, being a large corporation, we've split those duties up, right? So we have our digital signage team, and all they do is content creation, distribution. However, they are the first ones to hear about the issue, say from our branded environments or our marketing team, if someone reports, hey, I'm in Manhattan and there's a dark screen. But then we do have a separate knock that handles all the troubleshooting and whether or not we need to send a tech out or anything to troubleshoot the screen. And each division or department, if you will, has different security and different levels of what they can do. Our NOC, for example, can remote into the screens or into the players, see what's going on, maybe just do the fix remotely. Even we have some limited functionality over the screens themselves. You know, we have a lot where branch personnel, they love pushing buttons. So if they turned the screen off or they tried to hook up their Xbox and they change the input on the screen, we can, you know, see that and we can flip it back and make sure everything's up and running. But the content team has no control over that. So we very much segregate that. We limit who can do what. So.
Okay, great. And thinking about organizations that you might know that are doing this right. I'll start with Parrish. We'll start with you. Who can you name any of the maybe your clients that you have or companies that you've seen their press releases? Who's just really doing this right?
Yeah, so I try to be Switzerland when somebody asks a question like this because I want to be sure that we're honoring all the great brands that we get to work with, and we have somebody doing it right. But when I look at some current ones that have been in the news lately, you look at Batteries Plus is going with a solution for all their retail stores. It's doing it right. And I think also you need to look at, Kelly, were they in digital before and they're reinventing themselves? You know, it's always easier to be birthed than it is to reinvent yourself, right? And I think that they weren't in digital before and now they're getting into digital very heavy. I think Kroger has been in digital for a while. They're doing a lot of great things with digital and automation to checkout with CMS and content. And then American Airlines too, with their new corporate offices that are just beautiful, and how they're managing the dynamic LED experience with all different form factors and really using displays and content in very unique ways. Those would be three that I would say are doing it, you know, very well today and looking forward. I think they also have a plan that really embraces where they're going long term.
Great, Ryan. What have you seen?
Well, listening to Dominic, I think Wells Fargo has definitely gotten buttoned up, and they've done a good job.
I just sell it well.
And it's juicy details. That's it.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, it's probably just as easy to talk about like all the mishaps we've seen out there. You know, we've all seen, you know, you walk up and you see a display that was put in 3 months ago and it's still running a demo reel because they didn't have a plan or a strategy. Like if I had to pick an industry, so like instead of naming specific clients, I'd say universities have done a really good job. You know, over the years, they've really evolved to where they've figured out how to incorporate all these different departments on campus. You know, a lot of these universities have hundreds of screens, and, you know, think about it. They're incorporating campus security to put up alerts. They've got IT and facilities managing the uptime. They got students involved putting up activities. Each college and department's putting up stuff that's local to their building. Admissions is putting up tours. The alumni foundation's thanking donors. The sports groups are putting up events. You know, when you really look at schools, I mean, there's a lot of really great success stories of how universities have really leveraged digital signage to replace all of those traditional tack up bulletin boards that you know used to fill up the halls. So I think they've done a really good job.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of examples out there. I mean, and we're all mentioning big places. Like I think the one big place I was blown away by was the new Falcon Stadium in Atlanta. I mean, I don't even remember the number of screens they had, but it was ridiculous. And they were doing a great job with it. But that being said, I have a local mom and pop shop down the road that sells frozen custard, and their small little setup, the way they did it was fantastic. And so I don't know if there's a right or wrong way of doing things. It definitely comes down to the size and the scale of what you're trying to do. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of places out there and people that you can talk to that have, you know, done it before or learned from, you know, the mistakes. So there's a lot of resources out there. Hopefully we'll get back to where we can have trade shows again in person and, you know, be able to talk and learn experiences from people firsthand.
Yeah, that's a great point. Before we go to our wrap-up question where everyone gets to speak their mind freely, I wanted to take some questions from the audience. So to all of our attendees, if you haven't got your questions in yet, now is the time to throw those into the Q&A section. That's where we're watching them. We're going to try and get to a bunch of them. Let's start with let me see. Let's start with what role does content creation play in this? What are some best practices for sharing assets and templates? Who wants to take this one? Dominic.
No, Ryan, I don't want to interrupt Ryan. That's right.
Okay.
He already had a thought process started.
Creating content's an important piece of this whole thing. Again, I think it's looking at it and going, is the content you're putting up being auto-generated? Integrating live feeds? Are you tying into databases and spreadsheets? Is it working with an agency and getting custom-built graphics and animations and images? Is it going to third-party tools like Adobe Creative Suites, that kind of thing? Just like everything else, content creation has a role, and it's one of the users in this whole system. It may be a different person than the one that's scheduling the content and doing everything else that's creating it. It could be one and the same, depending on the size of the network. But, it's an important part, because if you have crummy looking content, the displays aren't going to accomplish the goal that was set forth with them.
Yeah, and I'll back that up with an example. So again, our lines of business, since we've restricted their access directly to the CMS, we had to come up with a solution for them to be able to handle the day-to-day content update and creation and things. So what we came up with was SharePoint. We already use SharePoint inside Wells Fargo. So our content team created templates and playlists that look into a specific folder in SharePoint where the user can upload a PowerPoint, a Word doc, whatever it may be, and even schedule that content inside SharePoint. So everything is done. All the line of business has to do is throw whatever they want into the SharePoint folder after obviously all their approval process and all that. And then the screen will pick it up automatic. So there's no silver bullet like on this, right? So content creation can be handled in a number of different ways. And that's just an example where, we kind of created the content and created the templates and branded it, and so that everything looks right and uses the right fonts and colors and whatnot. But then the line of business is still handling the day-to-day and responsibility of keeping that content fresh and new and relevant. So it's kind of a mix up of both.
Did you want to add anything, Parrish?
Yeah, no, I think Dominic and Ryan have really talked about, real life situations and what works. I think the number one philosophy we take when we initiate a digital strategy is start with the end in mind and what's the purpose of that content, and design those frames around that. It's very unique, like Dominic said, retail versus corporate or HR messaging. And we really try to help our partners and clients design those layouts that are easy to use and engaging, but yet have an end result, a positive end result.
Okay, great. I'm going to combine these two questions into one because I think that they kind of go together. So this sounds like it might be a lot of work. What kind of bandwidth do I need to allocate to support something like this? But on the flip side, second question, are there companies I can hire to manage this for us?
That sounds like a softball question.
Well, I can at least handle some of that. So bandwidth was a big issue for us inside the branches, because obviously we have branches everywhere. They're in like wherever in Alaska. Like we have tiny little shops running with no signal strength whatsoever. So it was a big deal for us to handle that, and we raised some red flags with the networking team quite a few times. So We came up with a solution. So our thing is we do everything off hours so that we don't interrupt any of the branch transactions and things like that. And then it's a system where it just downloads and caches everything on the thing. We're not streaming anything. The only time it's ever pinging back and forth is, say, for weather or headline updates, which is just a simple RSS feed, which doesn't take up any bandwidth at all. So I think it's going to depend on your network traffic, how much you have available, and then coming up with a solution to figure out how you can not raise any flags and still keep your content fresh and moving.
And I'll add in, since I'm with Samsung, 5G and LTE networks. We're doing a lot of out-of-box digital signage now. We try to stay away from networks that are running POS or PII data to stay compliant. So there's even some issues there. You can look at it when you talk about bandwidth that Dominic knows all too well about, right? And I think metering, something he's already talked about, off hours, but also keeping content once it's downloaded at the edge. So if there is a problem with connectivity, you're at least protected with the messaging. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I think it really depends on your strategy. But at the heart, you can do a lot of options without touching the existing network if your brand wants to do that. But there's so many options nowadays with the 5G. It really has been a big help to all of us.
Yeah, I think Paris and Dominic, hit the bandwidth part. I'll hit the second part of the question of, can you just hire somebody to do it? And there's lots of companies out there that have made businesses offering managed services. Everything from, they'll do the whole thing, hardware, software, they'll run the content for you. There's companies you can contract that'll just do the content. I mean, a lot of agencies will do that type of work. I think the thing you got to keep in mind is, just because you hire somebody to do it doesn't mean you can just turn your head and go the other way. Somebody's got to direct them. Like, there's still a resource required that has to say, what's the goal? What's the KPI? It has to approve things. So, I'd love to tell you it's as easy as you just write a check, but that's not always the case. I mean, there's going to be a little bit of effort that's involved if you really want to get the most out of a digital signage network. But you can certainly outsource any and lots of these parts. There's tons and tons of willing IT and AV integrators out there that would love to help with that.
Okay, thanks guys. There's a couple other questions that are less about multiple users and more about content management or the CMS in general. And I think that we definitely have the right group of people here to speak to them. So I'm gonna put them out for you guys. How important or relevant are RSS feeds for news, weather, headlines, etc., since everyone else already has that available on their phones?
I think it's situational, right? If you've got a display that's in a lobby or a waiting room where people are sitting there for 20 minutes, that type of content's valuable because it helps reduce perceived wait time and it's engaging and it's interesting. If you've got a display in a busy hallway where people are running by at 100 miles an hour, you don't want to congest the screen up with that type of stuff because it's going to detract from your message. So I think it's valuable in the right context.
And I think the right content, so the right content, the right time, right, in that journey. So what news are we showing on the screen? What are the age groups there? You don't want to have scary news or RS feed that goes against cross branding. And I hate to keep going back to branding and imagery, but that's really a lot of the calls we get is when something goes wrong. And so I think really it's situational and making sure those feeds are brand appropriate and reinforcing the brand quality at the right time.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if I have anything to add. I mean, I agree with Ryan. Like, obviously in our branches, that was the thing, was perceived wait time. So we were trying to, even if you're waiting in the queue to talk to a teller, you want to make it seem as short as possible, and that's a way to do it. We did run into issues. I mean, RSS feed is not as simple as 1, 2, 3. You got to make sure you're showing the right information, as Paris said, in the right city. You don't want to show weather for Seattle in New York. I mean, which of course we ran into. But and then headlines, again, to Parish's point, I mean, we applied filters. Our corporate group did not want any negative headlines about Wells Fargo being displayed in their branches. So we had to come up with all these different filter words where if it said something like this, it wouldn't be displayed. So yeah, I mean, RSS is a very powerful tool, and I think in the right situation, as Ryan said, it's pretty good content.
And there are third-party companies out there that will help you with your social media and messaging in store or on location in corporate office. Dominic's such a big company; they do a lot of their own. But there are companies out there that will help you, and even you can upload a news feed on site somewhere; it appears on the screen instantly. So, small or big, I think there's opportunities for everybody in this space.
Another question from the audience. When do you think it's beneficial to use a CMS to distribute and update all the content individually to all the screens versus trying to distribute it over some sort of AV over IP solution? Do any of you have any thoughts on that?
If I think I understand the question correctly, it's, it's a cost benefit of reducing the number of software licenses to reduce your costs there. That's a positive if you're using one media player and you're distributing it over, AV over IT. The downside is you've got a single point of failure. If the hard drive fails, you're going to lose your entire network, and you can't target your content. So everything's got to show the same content, which in certain applications may be the best thing. But, one of the ideal things with digital signage is being able to target the right messages in the right areas. So if I've got a larger network, just because today I may be showing the same thing on everything, if something happens, maybe I want to target that content. So it limits your flexibility, but if you're running a tight budget, what you outlined there definitely can conserve cost.
Yeah, and I can add to this. We have a line of different solutions based on what you're trying to achieve. And we have a line of solutions that if all the displays are on the same network, we have a mobile app that you can design and change content. And that's really for, I think Ryan said, a smaller organization. Someone didn't have a lot of different screens or content playing, because you have to be on site with your application to change that content. But it works for certain individuals, and we want to offer that, right? So I think it really depends on the application and what's your long-term vision with your digital.
Yeah, again, being such a large company, we actually do both to a certain extent. We have the one CMS, handles everything, the branches, the line of business, everything I've talked about so far, but then we also have a separate system for the branches in the break room, or actually any break room, branches, corporate offices, anywhere. That's just corporate messaging, and everybody gets the same thing coast to coast. So we have one separate system that handles that, AV over IP, and then just blast everybody the same message. Doesn't matter where you are. So we kind of have both. Not to
it sounds like there's a business case to figure out depending on what the real objectives are there. So, okay, guys, this is great. To everybody in the audience, if we didn't get to your question, I know that people's contact information was added to the chat section. So if you want to reach out to people and maybe get a question that we weren't able to answer clarified, one of our experts is certainly happy to do that. But before we wrap up, I want to go I want to give each of the three of you guys an opportunity to tell the attendees what is the one thing or the biggest thing that you would like them to take away from this session and to think about. Ryan, let's start with you.
I'd say my top takeaway is just get started. You're probably going to do it wrong, but that's okay. At least you started somewhere, and you can begin learning what works for you and your organization and your culture. Because you're going to fail at this technology. Just accept that and be flexible to adjust, because we've all seen the organizations that were constricted by paralysis because they had to figure everything out and they never got anywhere. You just got to get started. Take your lumps, be flexible. That would be my advice.
Learn.
Yeah.
As much as I do agree with that, I would say the one takeaway though is at least know the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
or at least what you're trying to do with that sign. What do you want to accomplish with your signage? If you know that, then typically the pegs will fall into place of, okay, I want it to display this and how often, and then what equipment or software you're going to need should just kind of fall into place. And then I would also say there's plenty of us out there in the industry. I mean, reach out, find somebody, ask questions. I mean, as fast as this industry is growing, it's still a very small, close-knit group. Like you see the same people over and over again when you go to the shows. And everyone is friendly. Everyone is nice. It's not like trade secrets where everybody's like, I'm not going to tell you what we did. Everybody's willing to share and tell you the lumps, like that Ryan said. Like, and so it's just nice and welcoming, and you can talk to anybody, and they'll help you out with it.
I have several key points I want everybody to take away. They're probably a little different from Ryan and Dominic. Number one, start with the end in mind, right? And be worried about tech obsolescence, because you don't want to get in a situation where you want to do something that you can't do in the future because of tech obsolescence. And also be smart. There are a lot of partners out there that Samsung uses that Ryan and Dominic know about that can help you speed and protect your business, that are a pay by month you can change out. And don't get locked in, right? Understand your flexibility and where you want to go. But I would start with the end in mind and really understand what you're paying for today. Will it take you where do you want to go in the future? And if not, that's okay, but understand how you change. And the tech obsolescence is cost explosion. Make sure your warranty and your service matches what you want to do and how long you're going to have it so you can monitor and have a safe program.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys, so much for your insights. I just wanted to let the attendees know that if you would like to learn more about content management or other parts of digital signage, that the Digital Signage Federation has a fairly robust library of online courses that you could look into, and there's a number of them that are focused on content management. They're taught by digital signage industry experts, and that's a great way to learn more about the digital signage space. So with that, I think we'll hand it back to Lauren.
Thank you, Kelly. So let's see here. I have posted a link in the chat box for our next webinar. We'll be hosting April 20th, and that will be on queuing and crowds. And I just want to say thank you to our speakers. You guys did a fabulous job, and thank you to all the listeners for joining us today on our Design Power Hour series of content management with multiple speakers. And I want to say a special thank you to Samsung for sponsoring the Design Power Hour series today. And this recording will be available on avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days, and your 1 RU credit will be applied to your transcripts within 5 to 7 business days. If you have any troubles, please contact us at webinars@avixa.org. And again, a huge thank you to Dominic, Ryan, and Parrish, and Kelly, and the DSF for hosting and providing insights into this content management world. I know I learned a lot, and hopefully you did as well. So please join us on April 20th again for queuing and crowds, and we will see you guys next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.